Hello, this is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am your host, or one of them, here with something very special. So, as you all know, I have been trying to find creative ways of providing you with new and exciting episodes of the podcast while still finding the time to write this children's retelling of the Odyssey that I'm doing, which is the most exciting thing to have happened to me in a long time. And it just so happened that everyone's favorite Hermes, Michaela Penguish, also had a project to do for her degree. And one of those classes that she had was on uses and abuses of antiquity in modern reception, something like that. And fortunately for, me and Michaela, she was able to make a podcast episode for that class. And even better, she did it absolutely in the vein of Let's Talk About Myths, baby, because she's Michaela, because she is the second in command of this podcast and she knows what she's doing. And so this episode, I am so excited for you to hear this. Michaela sent this to me and she was like, let me know, if you think it's good for the podcast. No pressure. And I listened to it and I was like, it's perfect. It's perfect. Michaela is breaking down not only some myths regarding Julius Caesar and what he did or did not do and did or did not say, but myths of Julius Caesar that directly relate to modern tech oligarchy. That's right. And oh my God, no, it's so good. So you're going to learn about the history of Julius Caesar, which is utterly, wild to begin with. The type of stuff that I know I cannot tell you in the excited and hilarious and interesting way that I want, but which fortunately Michaela can and does. So a world without Caesars, am I right? A world without billionaires. We can dream. This is Michaela's first solo episode. Enjoy. You'll love it. Please tell us in the Spotify comments or via Instagram or email or whatever. Tell us what you think of Michaela's first solo episode of the show, because I think it's amazing and I want her to do more like this, more little dips into history on topics where she is far more passionate and knowledgeable than I am. I can stick to the myths and the conversations and I will never give them up, don't get me wrong. But every once in a while, I am here to have Michaela tell us some wild aspects about history. So Michaela, Hermes, take it away.
Hermes Historia. Oh, wait, what did he say? Modern reception of Caesar. Hey! Hi! Hello, all. So a little bit of a different vibe happening here today. As you can probably tell, this isn't Liv. It's me, Hermes, Michaela. And we're not really going to be talking about myth stuff. Sorry about that. Actually, what you are getting is an airing of a final project I did for one of my classes. The class is called Uses and Abuses of Antiquity. And we spent the semester looking at the various ways that antiquity has been used throughout history, the motivations, implications, and harm that is caused by it. The modern reception of it all. We mostly spent our time looking at the way that the Bible was used, which was extremely interesting, but very outside of my wheelhouse. So for my final project, I decided to go my own way and stick to my strengths, which is looking at the Greco-Roman world. And since we were given the option to record a podcast, I thought, hey, why not? I know how to do that, and we could release it as an episode for you all. So here I am to talk with you all about a certain shirt that was worn by a certain tech bro last year. So during MetaConnect on September 25th of 2024, Mark Zuckerberg sauntered on stage wearing a black sweatshirt with AUT nihil written across the front. And as you probably know, that's Latin, folks, and it translates to either Zuck or nothing. Putting the obvious narcissism aside, this begs the question of where does this Latin come from? What is it hearkening to? And what connections are we being asked to make with its inclusion? Well, this is a play off of the phrase aut Kaiser, aut nihil, which means either Caesar or nothing, which obviously brings us to our favorite Roman dictator, Julius Caesar. So that's where we'll start. So let's get to know Caesar. Gaius Julius Caesar was born into the patrician Julii family in 100 BCE. Rome during this time was extremely chaotic, to say the least. It was often, it was at this time there was a series of pretty serious civil wars, and it was essentially a state that was run by like war generals. It was a difficult time and a time of great uncertainty. The city had a massive amount of power over the last couple of centuries and was still a republic. They had defeated great powers rather brutally, but firmly established themselves as the superpower in the Mediterranean. Carthage had been defeated, Greece had been taken over, and they had seats of power all over North Africa, Gaul, Spain, and beyond. The Republic was still going on, but it was chaotic. No one could get along, to put it lightly. There was Sulla's Civil War, the Mithridatic Wars, and the Catiline Conspiracy. So to put it lightly, Caesar grew up in, well, interesting times. Caesar, while a patrician, did not come from a very well-known nor wealthy family. The first ever mention we really have for a Julii within Rome's political sphere was in 208 BCE, and that was just as a praetor. We don't even have a Julii consul until about 50 years later in 157 BCE. They did claim descent from Aeneas' son Julius, which pulls them all the way back to the founding of Rome. And you know Aeneas. He's the protagonist of the Aeneid, which was written in the late 1st century BCE, and it was propaganda for the Julii family because of Augustus or Octavian. So, we definitely have some propaganda going on. But back to Caesar. After Sulla named himself dictator in the civil wars in 82 BCE, Caesar, who was not in Sulla's good books, went off to Asia for a while. He was a young man at this point, and at a time where he should be entering military service and starting to make a name for himself. And, well, he did a pretty good job of that. While Caesar wasn't necessarily the most adept man for the job, he was charismatic as all hell, and this will be his strength throughout his life. He knew how to talk a good game, to put it simply. A couple years later, Sulla dies, and Caesar makes his way back to Rome. Here he does what any good young Roman man should do and enters a life of politics. Remember how I said he was good at talking? Well, now he enters law, and he talks a lot and does a pretty good job of it. Within a short period of time, he manages to make quite a name for himself as an excellent rhetorician. And this is how he built his name within the Roman world. He was good at talking. He was a bit of a scandalous man who enjoyed the good life and good women, and he made plenty of good connections during his time. I think my own favorite story of Caesar is when he had been kidnapped by pirates. They asked for a certain amount of money in ransom, and he was like, I'm sorry, do you not know who I am? Ask for more. I really wish I could spend a little bit more time in the politics of all. Do I? No, I don't actually. But we're going to continue on. As time goes on, the first triumvirate was formed. So the first triumvirate was an alliance between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. They all came together to support each other and their goals in politics. These were all pretty well-known politicians in Rome at the time. Pompey was a very, very impressive military general, and that was his strength within the triumvirate. He was the military force. Crassus, I mean, let's be honest, whoever remembers Crassus? Crassus was the money. He had money. Good for him. And while Caesar was the enigmatic businessman, baby. Once again, he could talk. That's what he was good for. He could get people on his side. Caesar then goes off to Gaul with his own soldiers and is out there for a bit. Because, you see, when he returns to Rome after his successes in Gaul, the triumvirate falls to shit, with Caesar and Pompey having a bit of a falling out. In 49 BCE, Caesar crosses the Rubicon, which separated Gaul from Rome. Essentially, he is marching on Rome at this point with his own soldiers, and this starts the Civil War. Civil War breaks out for a year and ends with Caesar defeating Pompey, who then flees to Egypt, where he is beheaded. There's a bunch of events that happen in Egypt. You know, Caesar and Cleopatra were really well known. They supported each other quite a bit. He really helped her gain power over her little brother. They also have a child together, which is, fun. But what happens in the end of all this is that Caesar ends up gaining ultimate power within Rome. He is declared dictator several times. The first was in 49 BCE when the Civil War started, although he sorted out the problems and then immediately seceded, which is what you're supposed to do when you are declared dictator in Rome. This is not a position that you keep and hold on to. It is a political position because Rome, the way Rome's politics were set up, you would have two consuls. And each consul had their own sort of sphere that they looked after, but these were the two men who were in charge for the year. However, in times of strife and troubles, a dictator could be established. And this was one person who was essentially put in to fix everything and sort of get everything back in order and get everything back on the right track. But they were not supposed to hold on to the position. They were supposed to get everything back on track and then step down. That was the rule of dictatorship. So, he does this during his first one. He does it a bit more. And then in 44 BCE, he claims dictatorship for life. And this is a problem in Rome, especially a Republican Rome. One of the big things about Rome and their sort of understanding of themselves is that there are no kings. There are no kings in Rome. This was decided a long, long time ago in the beginning of their very early history. It is central to their identity, specifically politically. Caesar, as dictator for life, is essentially king. And for the other politicians, this was a problem. So in the end, on March 15th, 44 BCE, just a couple months shy of him being made dictator for life, Caesar was assassinated. This is the Ides of March, y'all. The watch out for your coworkers day. Essentially, he was stabbed to death by all of his coworkers on the way to work in an attempt to stop any further reach for power. A2, Brutus, meh. Ultimately, this did nothing good for the Roman Republic. It turned Caesar into a martyr for his followers, which then allowed Octavian, his nephew and later named Augustus, as well as Mark Antony, to further break down the Republic until Octavian eventually becomes the first emperor of Rome. So that was Caesar in his own time. He was a charismatic politician who had so much drive for power that he really set up Rome, as it was then, for a downfall and then the subsequent empire. And by God has he been loved in the popular mind throughout all of history. So let's look at that a bit. This all starts with Caesar himself and his own writings. So Caesar wrote two separate texts, De Bello Gallico, or the Gallic War, and De Bello Civili, or the Civil War. These are really interesting texts. I've read a bit of De Bello Gallico in its Latin, begrudgingly. I didn't love it, but it wasn't the worst. But they're interesting in the way that Caesar presents himself as two different entities. See, he is both the author and he is a character within these texts. I mean, he wrote about himself in third person, which is, I don't know, something about that I both love and hate. It's like, oh, the drama of it all. This man is so dramatic, and it's kind of glorious if it wasn't so horrifying. So he often represents himself as being the moral guideline or the emotional guideline, and the man who uses rationality to make ends meet. You know, in De Bello Gallico, he does this in apposition of the Gauls, who are, as barbarians, irrational, emotional, and immoral. This is a schema that is old as time in the Greco-Roman world. We always have the rational Greco-Roman man versus the barbarians. He, the Roman man, is, and in this case Caesar, shows himself as being decisive and swift in war. He makes all the right decisions, and he does it at such a speed because, well, he's the ultimate amazing Roman man. This is his presentation of himself. And I find it interesting. I mean, I do think if we're all going to be writing about our own lives and stories, we kind of want to present ourselves a certain way. And certainly Caesar, who is known for being very good at making things go his own way, I guess, or of carving a path for his own goals, he does this through language so successfully. And I think we see that in these two texts. You know, he is portraying the Gauls this one way, as being these sort of barbarians who have strange practices and who do human sacrifice. And he is this amazing, upright Roman man who honors the gods and does his duty for Rome. And I think that's really important to his characters. He often presents himself as someone who is doing things for the people themselves and for Romans as a whole. This is his presentation of himself, right? He is presenting to his audience a clear characterization. He is a decisive man who does not let emotions run the show in any way at all. The ultimate Roman. And what this is propaganda. And we often, when we think of Roman propaganda, we think of Augustus and his, oh my God, the Areopagus, and all his different ways of sort of using propaganda in order to send this message of himself and his family and Roman politics at the time. And that we often tout him as the best propagandist in Rome. But really, I think we need to look back and look at Caesar, because guess what? I think he did it a little bit better than his nephew. Caesar remains charismatic throughout his reception. But we get different visions of him within the Roman world. If we look at Lucan's Bellum Civili, which is an unfinished epic poem that recounts the civil war that Caesar started by crossing the Rubicon. This poem is, ultimately about the collapse of the Roman Republic. This was written in about the 60s CE, which is about 100 years after Caesar. So this is a contemporary text in a sense, or as close as we can get in some ways. It is written during sort of the end of the Julio-Claudians, so during Nero's reign. And Lucan, well, he didn't like Caesar. He portrays him as a man who is reaching for power, as someone who very much so wanted to be king, and who was very un-Roman-like in his behavior and motivations. And I think what's interesting about this text is it's also close enough to the old republic that, that time of when Rome was a republic is sort of still in the popular memory. And remember, when the empire was going, They kind of were pretending it was still a republic. They were like, oh no, we're still the Roman Republic, la la la, Oh, the emperor, no, he's not an emperor. He's just the first man of Rome. It's an empire. Emperor is a king, whatever. This text by Lucan doesn't really depict Caesar all the best. So now at this point we have two depictions. We get one from Caesar himself, showing himself as this amazing Roman general, looking out for the well-being of the people. And then we get one of Lucan, where Caesar is a power-hungry tyrant trying to tear the world down around him for whatever scraps of power he can get. Now let's jump ahead to the 13th century, where we have a text called Les Fêtes des Romains. This is an account of Caesar's life by an unnamed author, and it pulls from various different Roman sources. Caesar himself is one of the sources, and so is Lucan, but we also have other Romans such as Suetonius. The Caesar we get from this is more complicated. He isn't one character. He's an entirely good. He isn't entirely bad. He isn't the good Roman man Caesar himself presents himself as, but he also isn't the tyrant that Lucan presents. He is complicated. And ultimately what this did do was embrace the fact that Caesar was a person who was multifaceted and complicated and all the difficult things. But Les Fêtes had a great impact on the Western world. The unnamed author presents this work not as entertainment, but as a learning experience, and its examination becomes widely popular and spreads all throughout the Western world as quick as it could. What this text ultimately does is sets up what Nigel Mortimer describes in medieval and early modern portrayals of Julius Caesar as the phenomenon of Caesarius, establishing Caesar as a prism through which any number of issues may be refracted. This is where we get the way to understand the world through Caesar. This is the Caesar who enters Renaissance Italy, who enters the French wars of religion, and who enters the American colonies. When we get to the 21st century, we see then that Caesar becomes a figure for, American imperialism. This largely has to do with the Iraqi war and George W. Bush. Bush starting the war in Iraq has been described by some as America crossing the Rubicon, where America now becomes seen as this single imperial power that is trying to protect the Pax Americana, or the American peace. And this thought process of using Julius Caesar and his memory to understand American politics is something that can't be ignored. We are constantly asked to reflect on history as almost a roadmap for what's happening in the present. Empires rise and they fall. They go on and they go for their own goals and their aims and their how to expand. And really, this is started in a lot of ways with Rome, in Western thought, might I add, because Rome was seen as the successful empire. And how did this empire start? Well, it started with Caesar. Sure, Augustus was the first emperor, but what is the thing that caused the crumbling of the Republic? That's Caesar. But let's go back to Aut Kaiser aut nihil, because that is what Zuckerberg put on his shirt. And I have seen in several places, all interestingly, using the exact same words to say that this saying was originally from Caesar, that Caesar himself said Aut Kaiser aut nihil, and that some scholars agreed to this. And through all of my research, I have found absolutely nowhere where this is connected with Caesar. At no point did I see anything that says, yeah, this is definitely something Caesar said, but only in these sort of public-facing articles or public-facing websites am I seeing this is something that Caesar said. What I do see it connected to is Cesare Borgia. So who thought we would meet a Borgia? Because I did not. And I have to say, my knowledge of the Borgias and sort of Renaissance, is that a Renaissance? Yeah, Renaissance Italian history is limited. I know the Borgias through Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. I played that in my youth, in my childhood. And I remember being fascinated with them, but not looking into them. And I remember weirdly loving Lucrezia Borgia so much that I named my guitar after her. She was lovingly called Lulu for a while. So, yeah, Cesare Borgia. He's not who I imagined to come across, but it means I got to learn a little bit about him. So Cesare Borgia was an Italian prince in the 14th century, and aut Kaiser, aut nihil, well, that was his personal motto. Cesare's name comes from Caesar. I mean, Cesare had his own problems. What man in extreme power does not? He was the illegitimate son of a pope. He had a sister, like I said, Lucrezia. He was the Nepo baby of all Nepo babies. He got his appointments, his job, his positions of power really through his connections with the papacy. That's not to say he wasn't good at what he did. He wasn't the worst at his job. He managed to hand on to it and as well as expand quite a bit, but he did get his position because of his daddy. He was the general of papal armies, as any good Roman, Italian of his age should be. Remarkably, there's a lot of things about him that are actually quite similar to Caesar, but I feel like this should be kept in mind that these are two men who are in positions of power, who are vying for more power. And I think that is what makes them similar to each other. Machiavelli wrote about Cesare Borgia in The Prince. The Prince was a philosophical work that was supposed to instruct princes in life. Cesare is in here essentially as an example of something called a lucky prince. You know, it's one who gets his position by luck. I'm using quotation marks. There was nepotism. But sure, luck. And a lucky prince, gains his power this way and doesn't necessarily do a bad job, but they really struggle with holding on to power. However, Cesare Borgia was shown as being sort of the exception to this. He was a lucky boy, but he did manage to keep his positions of power and keep his appointments quite well. In the end, Cesare was similar to Caesar in the way that he was enigmatic and was at least smart in his political maneuvers. He was charismatic. He had goals of furthering himself within the political sphere of his time. He was a general. He was a politician, prince, whatever. I believe he was a cardinal at some point. I don't understand the workings of the Catholic Church. Excuse me. But he rose to power. But he wasn't maybe as successful, as Caesar. He didn't quite deconstruct, I guess, the way Caesar did. He kind of did his best, then died. Because you see, when his close ties with the papacy kind of disintegrated because, well, the Pope died. And then another Pope was put in who was his friend. And he died. And then a new Pope came into power who, guess what? Didn't quite like Cesare. And then, that kind of led to his eventual death at Navarra, where he was captured by some knights, killed. They stripped him, took all his valuables, and left him dead, naked in a field with just a green tile covering his genitals, which is quite the way to go, unfortunately. So then, why is it a problem to connect aut Kaiser aut nihil with Caesar himself? I think it's important to remember how Caesar is presented to us and what Caesar represents in popular thought, right? Caesar is a disruptor. He is a man who, because of his own ambitions, was happy to see order fall for his own benefit. And I'm not trying to say that the Republic was a good thing. I really don't have that many strong opinions about the Republic or Roman politics generally. But Caesar, he was about himself, ultimately. He wanted to gain power. But he's complicated. From his own viewpoint, he was a political mastermind who upheld everything that Rome was. From Lucan's viewpoint, he was the man who brought an end, He was a political evil mastermind who was happy to see the world fall if it meant that he could get a couple steps ahead. And up until now, all throughout history, he is a character who is surrounded with decadence, and he is charismatic, and he is disruptive. He is tied with Egyptian royalty, with Cleopatra, and he is the one who knows how to talk a big game and get people on the side, and he crumbles the world around him. But this phrase, aut Kaiser aut nihil, either Caesar or nothing, all or nothing, God, is it a problem? It leaves no space for nuance, for people. It calls to one figure who is happy to watch the world burn as long as he got his own power in the end. And that's what it ultimately means. And I also think it's incredibly important to put aside the idea that this was originally something Caesar said himself, because I don't think that's the case at all. Sure, Caesar was an egomaniac, but this phrase is far too on the nose. He was popular because he represented those who weren't being represented. He went out of the way to make himself seem like he was standing up for the little guy. And if he came out and he said, aut Kaiser, aut nihil, like, guys, it's me or it's nothing. I mean, this is so anti-Roman, so anti-everything they stood for that it just wouldn't have worked. It would be him laying all his cards on the table in a way that just wouldn't have been successful. And did Caesar kind of see the world this way? I mean, I don't know. I think he was. I think there was a reach for his own personal power. I think that was his goal. But I think he wouldn't have succeeded at it, or maybe gone as far as he did. I don't know if we can say he succeeded or not. He died. He was assassinated by all his coworkers. That's a bummer. But that's too on the nose. But the Caesar of later thought, yeah, I think that makes sense for the Caesar in later imagination. It works more for Borgia and his motivations. The Borgia family were disruptive in their own way and hoping to gain more and more power in their own time in Italy. Caesar, in the thought of the elite, well, he is a man who essentially managed to grab all the power that he wanted, despite the limitations that were in place. He represents the ability to grab power that elite men of Western Europe so happily wanted their whole life. But let's look at this more, right? Sure, Caesar toppled the Republic, but he also wasn't the one who ended up gaining the power in the end. He simply laid the path for others to come after him and create an entire new world. Remember, after Caesar was the empire, which, I mean, what is an emperor if not a king? I feel like I could say this on repeat. No kings in Rome. What's an emperor? Whatever. That's not the point. And the thing is, Octavian, later Augustus, he was able to use the memory of Caesar as a man who is beloved of the people in order to bring this change in. So then what does Caesar represent in the end? He is the hearkener of a different order, of a new time. But this is dangerous because to whom does a new order benefit? When this comes from those who are wealthy and have power, who have been riding the wave of capitalism in order to benefit themselves alone, well, we should be concerned, because a new world would not be for the benefit of the everyday person. It would, as Caesar was trying to do, benefit only those who are in the upper echelons, to keep them there, to further their own wealth and their own goals. And we see this through the policies that they enact and support, through the change in social media, through the change in policies on their sites that allow bullying of LGBTQ plus peoples, that allow far-right thought that just, oh my God, that just shits on the marginalized people, that allows that thought to be protected, but calling those people out, that gets flagged. Not okay. And they don't try to protect those who are marginalized in society. And this is so concerning. And this is so terrifying. Because what we are seeing then is these big media moguls. These are people who have the power to spread information and spread misinformation, telling us exactly what they want to be. We want to be the hearkeners of a new world order that ultimately benefits us and doesn't protect others and others in marginalized positions. We don't care about them. They're the little people. We care about us. That is what it's saying. And I was first brought attention to this because, I'm someone who kind of avoids social media a lot these days because I'm tired, okay? I'm tired. But I was kind of brought into this because I saw an article about Blue Sky's CEO, Jay Graber, who had a response to Zuckerberg's shirt. See, she came on stage wearing a shirt that looked exactly like his. But the text on the shirt, instead of aut zuc aut nihil, it said mundus sine Caesaribus, or a world without Caesars. And that's powerful, because what we're seeing there is an understanding that a world without a person who is fine with dismantling the world around them as long as it benefits them in the end, well, that's a better world. A world where people look out for each other and their community and try to support each other. A world is better without people like Julius Caesar. Okay. Is that a great ending? I'm sure my professor listening to this right now is like, fantastic, Michaela. You end it with okay. I'm not good at this. I do my best. But anyways, I did want to share this with you all because I think it's interesting. And while modern reception is not my strong suit, and it's certainly something I don't enjoy doing, I do love interacting with, and I do love seeing other people's work on modern reception. It's been important to dig into these a bit more and to piece it out. And why not share it with you all? Because you all know it's who love ancient history as much as Liv and I do. And I'm excited to hear what you guys think about this. You know where to find us. And until other time, Liv's not here to say her thing, so I'll just say mine, which is, and I'm Michaela, and I'm here too. Peace out, y'all.
Ugh, nerds, thank you so much for listening. Again, this was Michaela's first solo episode, and I am hellbent on getting her keen to do more. But she is rightfully, this is new. It's scary. It took me 8 years to get as comfortable as I am, and even still, one mean comment can throw me for a loop. So, let us know what you think. Please give us suggestions maybe on these types of historical topics or misrepresentations, misunderstandings of history. Do you have more suggestions? Are there things you'd love for Michaela to talk about in this way? Because I know there are lots that I would love to hear Michaela talk about. So let us know again in the Spotify comments if you're listening there, or via Instagram comments, emails, I don't know, whatever. Let us know what you think. But don't be mean, because that's not helpful to anyone. Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert, except here, which obviously I did not write or produce any of this. This episode of Let's Talk About Myths, Baby was written and produced by Michaela Penguish, the Hermes, to my Olympians. Select music by Luke Chaos. The podcast is part of the Memory Collective podcast network, for which there will be more information soon. We are getting there. Sign up for the newsletter at mythsbaby.com/newsletter. Again, we're getting there. The site is currently getting a whole new rebrand. It should be ready soon. And until then, I can't really do too much with it, including newsletters / let's be honest, I've been working on the Odyssey and I keep forgetting to fully finalize a newsletter, but one day we'll have them. We're getting our shit together slowly but surely. ADHD is fun. I also am eager for more questions for the next Q&A episode. So if you have something you want me to talk about, a question, comment, concern, whatever, do you have something you just want me to ramble about? Great. Tell me. mythsbaby.com/questions. There you can find a form to fill out just for simple, easy questions that way, or you can try out the new voice note feature that I am trying to get into. I would love to be able to play your questions, comments, concerns, whatever, via voice note in the episode. How fun would that be? So far, I've only gotten one, and it was a person telling me things that I didn't need to hear and definitely could have been in a message and not a voice note that I was really excited to get, but then was completely unusable because it was... Anyway, it's fine, go leave me one of those that I can play in the episode. Would you? Thanks. That'd be great. I'm losing it. I gotta go back to the Odyssey, guys. Oh, it's exciting. It's all gonna be worth it in the end. I am Liv, and I love this shit.